Yeah, there you go. Yes.
There we
Oh,
go.
wonderful. Yes. Sat Sri Akal ji, Dr.
Sasrikal
Jaspoti.
ji, how are you?
I'm very well.
I'm ever
Yes.
so sorry for this
Not to
morning.
worry. Not to worry. You look, I know I've seen your paintings before, but they always look so colorful.
Oh,
Yes. Yeah.
thank you.
Wonderful.
How have you been?
I've been really good. Yes. Yeah. So you've been, I know last time I spoke with you, you were traveling. Were your travels good? Last time we spoke, that was probably
It's
about 6 months ago.
yeah, my gosh, it's already been such a long time.
Mm.
Yes, I'm always happy to be traveling and all over the place.
Yeah, it's a good way to learn, isn't it? So,
Absolutely.
so today we'll talk about the sustainable goals.
Yeah.
And so in, I mean, the reason I chose this concept is because there is a lot of talk about how we're actually going backwards rather than forwards. So in your experience, how well do you think we're doing with advancing in terms of collectively in a global sense towards achieving these sustainable goals? What's your experience of this?
I think that we've made some progress, but not enough progress. And as you say, that some people think that maybe we are going backwards.
Mm.
Perhaps we are, but I think that with more awareness for those people who are not educated enough, there is going to be progress. And at this moment, I would say, yeah, some places there is less. We're going backwards because the goal is to have everything wonderful and working by 2030, which is only 5 years from now.
Mhm.
That's not a long time, as we know. And when I hear about, the glaciers and, the rise in temperature and all that, I feel that, um, oh, and especially about the floodings that have been occurring all over the place, the flash floods, those bring to mind this notion of, are we moving anywhere? Are
Mhm.
we getting anywhere at all? Yeah.
Yeah, because the purpose of education for a lot of people, it's about material advancement, and a lot of that material advancement has come at a cost to the ecological environment, hasn't it?
Mm.
So
So,
in terms of like, because I know like education is like your main interest, do you
yes,
think that
yes.
in education, do you think that we are is our education inherently sustainable in what we're what we believe to be the purpose of education? Because if the purpose of education is material advancement, if that is the purpose of it, because in the past, I mean, when I did my degree,
Mm.
um, I was one of those fortunate people that I did my degree without my degree was in psychology, and I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to get a good job at the end of it. I did psychology because I was interested in psychology, and I did psychology because I thought it's going to enable me to kind of like understand life more. But these days, that's kind of quite a privilege to do a degree, to invest. Like here it costs £9,000 a year, so we're talking about £27,000. Not a lot of people can feel that it's a privilege to pay £27,000 simply to have a better lifestyle. You want to invest that money because you want to have a job that pays well, that enables you to get a good house, a good car, and all the material kind of accessories that go with it. So if that remains the purpose of education, it helps us to become more productive rather than more sustainable, then we're still kind of like going to be on that wheel of towards exponential growth, which is going to be at the cost of sustainability.
Mm. So yes, I definitely think that the goal of our education has to change. Not the goal is not only to get a job at the end of it, but to have a sustainable lifestyle in which we are living ourselves and helping others too. So education is the only way that we can think of sowing the seeds of a quality, of quality, informative style of living, and where we can actually reap the flowers of transformation. Because without any education, it's not going to work at all. And I think what you're saying is that if we are only going for education to achieve a degree, and then with the final goal of getting a job at the end of it, and we're spending money on that, but during that time, the actual education of informing ourselves of what's happening in the world, if that's not taken care of, then it's useless. That's how I feel anyway. And I know if I look back at my own education, and I don't think there was even one subject, oh, maybe geography a little bit, where this was a priority at all. And I understand that it's a few years back now, but even now, as an educator, I still go into schools and I still look at what's being taught. And there are certain subjects that are now being introduced where children are not only learning math and English, but they are also learning about sustainability, the environment, and why we have to be the way we are. And I'm actually very, very happy about that those things are coming into education,
You
especially
know,
in the elementary schools.
mm,
Mhm.
in the olden days, like before schools were made compulsory, people, like say for example in the Punjab, there were um, the children learned the skills of farming by watching their parents do the
Yeah.
farming. People learned the skills of, let's say, weaving by, it was like the apprenticeship kind of model of education. That was the
Mhm,
main model, wasn't it? You
mhm,
didn't,
mhm,
if you wanted to learn a trade, you learned with somebody, not in a school, but you learned with the person who did that really well. And usually that was somebody from your own community, either your own family or your own community at least. So in a way, this concept of social mobility has disrupted that. So for example, we don't have to be born into a musical family to learn to play the violin, for example. We can choose. We have more choices available to us, but it's come at a cost of that. A lot of what we learn is not entirely relevant because we're not always learning what we're passionate about learning. We're spending maybe 90% of our time will be learning things that we're not really interested in, and maybe 5 or 10% is like that subject that we're really interested in, but we don't learn it to as much depth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what is brought along these concepts of unschooling or homeschooling, because so many people, so many parents are, they're realizing that the education that their children are getting is not what they want them to actually have, because all it is about, I give you this, you give it back to me, and you memorize it, and you're not learning anything. So, in with the new models of learning through creativity and inquiry, where the children are brought towards projects where they can have hands-on experience and actually learn about the environment and all the things that are affecting it, and everything makes so much more sense than following curriculum page after page of numbers and just learning to read, etc., where it's not actually being applied in real life at all.
Yeah.
And so, when, so for example, I think I've mentioned this to you before, that I was involved in, training some teachers in the north of Punjab. And so what we were doing is we were trying to bring in creative inquiry based methodologies into the classroom, where where the teachers didn't always have to say, go to page 135 to, and then get this done and hand it to me like that. And they were like thrilled to be able to do that kind of education. But then at the end of the whole thing, they came and they said, we like it, the students like it, but the parents want marks.
Mhm.
They don't care about anything else except the grade. And so then I think, as you go down, and, it's not only about the schools, it's about the community level that the education has to come before we can do anything for the environment.
Yeah,
And
because
these
at
are
the end
things.
of it, I suppose the parents, they want the marks because they want to know whether they'll get a good job.
That's it. It comes back to the same thing, doesn't it?
Mhm.
It circles back to the thing. Are they going to be able to get into this thing or that?
Mhm.
And until our thoughts change, these things will continue. And so, even though we know the importance of education, both for the adults and the children, about these horrific things that are happening around the world, can't do anything about it until we all unify and try to get this as a model for everybody.
Yeah. And when we look at number 11, sustainable cities and communities, that has to be, education needs to be like a central focus of sustainable communities. And if education is not about relationships, because very often it's about production rather than the relationships. We think about like even learner-centered education, because like over the last 20, 30 years, there's been very much of a focus here on student-centered learning, but it's not community-centered. It's treating that student as though they are an isolated person rather than, well, what does the community need? It's like, what kind of relationships does this student need to build in their community for it to be sustainable, which relates to that good health and well-being. How much is that education? I know people who've got degrees, but they don't know how to manage their own well-being. They are highly skilled in they've got masters, they've got PhDs, but they don't have good health. How can that be? It's like, so education these days doesn't seem to focus on like the fundamentals of like, well, the fundamental point of having a good education must be that you have to have, it's designed to enable you to have a good life, and that good life needs to be based on good health. And if we don't know, why we're getting all these chronic illnesses like depression and health conditions and
Yes,
diabetes and all of
absolutely.
that, if our education is not kind of helping us to avoid those things, there's certainly like something missing, something which is unsustainable in the education.
Yeah. Yeah, to that point, where we have to understand our well-being along with the goals that we are trying to achieve, whether they be personal or at a world level. The very important base of all of that foundation is yourself, because only when you're able to function in that manner, where you are understanding the universe as yourself, then you can perhaps begin to help in some sort of way. So, for example, I'm sure you're aware that, for the past 5, 10 years now, many schools have taken also the mindfulness into their curriculum. And they are not only doing that, they're calling the teachers into it mindful teaching, where the teachers have to be aware of who they are, what they are, and what they are transmitting to their students. Because unless the teacher is able to, um, you know, um, portray it and model it, the students, they can't emulate it. And just by talking about it is not going to work either. It has to be in the life of that person who's trying to show that here's a way forward. And absolutely, well-being for me is a very, very important foundational goal for any change that has to come, whether it's personal or at the world global level. Yeah.
Yes, and I think a lot of the education is focused on the subjects being like, we call the subject it, like geography is it, rather than how does it relate to ourselves? How is geography a part of ourselves? And when we make any subject a part of ourselves. It's no longer separate from us, it's part of who we are.
Mm, absolutely, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Yes. It's only when you immerse yourself into the subject and understand how it's going to affect you and your family and others around you that it makes sense. Like the common, the question that's always asked by somebody learning algebra is, when am I ever going to use this in my life? And similarly, if I'm teaching Canadian geography or British geography, the first question is going to be, when am I ever going to use this in my life? Well, you are, because you're part of it, and this is where the solution is going to come from. So it's actually left up to the educator that has to understand it before it can be become a part of the student's life. So the
Yes. And
emphasis goes
even these
back to you.
goals, even these goals, I think if we think of these goals as being kind of separate to us, and then it becomes a matter of like, well, when we have time and space in our lives, we might think about them, but not at the moment because my life is not concerned. But this thing about no poverty, it does relate to us. How do we want to have no poverty in our own lives? What is it that we're doing to, and I know, like, for myself, I spent a long time in education because education was seen to be like the safety net to avoid poverty. That was why we spent so much time and energy. That's why we value education, because it's meant to be a way of like avoiding poverty and avoiding hunger. But there are some of those things that it's kind of helped us to avoid some of those things, but it's caused some other problems, like, for example, the climate action or pollution, and does it really help us to advocate justice in a global sense? So we might have, this is why I think we have to think about our relationship with these goals, that all of those goals are a part of who we are as well, aren't they?
Yeah, that's why, education is my priority. Because through education, I think any of those other goals, they all come under the umbrella, you know. Like, for example, if we think about climate action, okay? So we need to have, underneath that umbrella comes the affordable clean energy, the industry and the infrastructure, the sustainable cities and communities, all of that. And then we have quality education. So, in that education, under that umbrella comes the gender inequality, the reduced inequality, and life below water, uh, peace and justice, everything that comes under there. And finally, the third hat that I'd like to look at, or the umbrella, is which encompasses good health and well being, like we just talked about, and no poverty, water and sanitation, and decent work and economic growth, responsible consumptions, etc. So all of those can be divided into that. But at the end of it all, that education is the only way through any of those. All other values come under that. So only when you have a solid foundation of educated minds, a solid future for us as individuals and at the universal level, can be realized. So unless we bring awareness, a sense of responsibility and ownership, educating those, this is what I said, though we have to educate those who have everything already, and they couldn't care less if the others have it or not. They have to be educated in the way that sharing and understanding what they are doing is actually having an impact on those who don't have. And then we have to educate those people who don't have. When I say don't have, is those people who are in places where they don't have proper water, sanitation, and everything else that comes under that. But some of them are not even aware of that they don't have, that what they're doing is wrong. So I know that there are several programs that, in the world, maybe not, they're not enough, where they're going to the different areas of the world to show them, hey, here's a sanitary pad. This is what you do, because they're not even aware of it. So what I'm trying to say is that there is education required at that level where everybody has it, but they don't care enough and to share enough with everybody. And then there are those people who actually don't have anything, are not even aware of it. We've got to increase that sense of awareness and responsibility.
Yeah, I suppose responsibility is a key word there, isn't it? And first of all, that responsibility, even those of us who are educated, I mean, I consider myself to have spent most of my life in education, but I'm still ignorant about health. I haven't studied enough about how to avoid illnesses, and because
Mm.
that wasn't a priority for me. It becomes a priority when you fall ill. And
And as you get older.
yes, that's right. So I think in the first instance, there has to be, like our community is prone to chronic illnesses such as diabetes, for example, because of
Oh,
our
yes.
the food that we eat.
Mm.
Um, and I don't think there hasn't been enough research done on diabetes in our communities. There's been, all the research done on diabetes seems to be generic, and it's not necessarily like, well, what is it about our diet that causes diabetes and how do we manage it? And it's about taking responsibility. So I am taking responsibility now for exploring this, but at the same time, I know a lot of people with diabetes who don't take responsibility, and they simply take the drugs because the doctors tell them to take drugs. And so for me, that's not a high quality education where we don't take responsibility to think for ourselves and to question and to challenge other people's opinions about what to do.
Yeah, I'm so much on board with that. In fact, it's now been over 10 years since at our local Gurdwara, I, was part of an initiative that brought this awareness to the Sangat. That the type of food that we eat, and actually there are studies that are done on this, and they have been done on Sikhs, that have this diet of fried food and sweet, even in the gurdwaras we serve those, all the mathiais, and we also serve fried pakode and samosas. I mean, those are the things that you go for some of the times. So we stopped that. It's been over that, and people were not happy, let me tell you, because that is what we are expecting when we go there. But when they were made aware of the fact that the amount of sugar that they are consuming, and the amount of, everything else, the flour, the ghee or the butter that goes into even prasad and everything, it's not good. And now, after all of these, we have finally come to a point where everybody's agreeing on it, and then they're saying thank you.
So what do you serve instead?
Vegetables.
Mhm.
And we make dal where you're not going to make, and you're not putting tarka too much of it and everything. We try to keep it as low profile in terms of those items that I mentioned, and we don't serve sweets. No mathiais are allowed at the gurdwara. You
Mhm.
can do what you want in your home, you know and I think the common basis over here is that you want to give a lot out because you are trying to, perhaps, Guru Sahib wants that, but that's the wrong, outlook on it, because what our Guru Sahibs have said is simple living,
Mhm.
simple eating. You don't, eat to live, but you live. No, it's the other way around, isn't it? You don't live to eat, but eat to live.
Mhm.
And that's about it. So it's not about the food. The focus has to be about our own well-being inside when we go to the Gurdwara and find that universal well-being there.
Yes, you're the first person who has mentioned, that Mathai is not allowed at the Gurdwara. The very first time I've heard that, because all the Gurdwara I go to, there's jalebiyan, there's Mathai, there's pakode, there's samosa. So all of
And yes, like we could say that, yeah, people can make their own decisions and they don't have to have it. But when it's in front of you, you tend to take it. And so we encourage them to bring fruit instead.
mm,
Okay, you want to give something, go ahead and
mhm,
make it fruit, make it nuts, and anything that is baked and not, like these kind of things rather than fried. And it works. It works. We, salads, lots of beautiful, wonderful salads that can, give you that same wonderful feeling of eating. So
mhm,
it is something that I think that I would want to encourage everywhere in all the gurdwaras,
mm,
especially because we know that we are in right now, it's an aging population is the prime uh, part of our population.
mhm,
And so the our elders, they come there, and here they are, like you said, they're on medication.
mm.
They can hardly walk, but they're taking these matiais and they're eating
Yeah.
because they have no notion of what, like what's happening with that sugar. So, of course, I know that I've heard of camps that have been set up in various gurdwaras where this kind of education is given. And that's again education, awareness, and taking responsibility for your own well being before you can do anything for anyone else.
Mm. Yeah, because fruit instead of mati, like I'd 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 always take a mango instead of a mati any day. A
Yeah,
nice ripe mango. That's I know it's got sugar in it, but it's
yeah.
natural. So it's a natural sugar.
It's in that, and it breaks down easily, more easily than the other ones.
Mm,
And so, it is something that you can, you know, sort of indulge in if you want to at that time.
It's a nice treat. So
Yes,
it's a nice treat.
absolutely. Yeah.
So you see, yeah, so there, like, we've got education kind of interconnected with good health and well-being. And then a lot of people suffer from loneliness, and a lot of people suffer from depression, and they take tablets for depression. So depression is very often loneliness and lack of stimulating relationships masked up, isn't it? It's like a
Mhm.
mask for disintegrating relationships, because families have disintegrated because children have moved on. They work miles away and even in different countries. And like having just seeing your family on FaceTime or on Zoom calls and whatever is not it's not going to make up for somebody being there with you and just asking you how your day's been on a physical level. And so how is that kind of interconnected with Sikhi? Because in with Sikhi, I suppose the gurdwaras they are meant to be a way of like bringing the community together. So there's always sangat, so that even if your family's not around, you've still got the sangat. But do we feel connected enough with the sangat so that we don't need to take tablets for depression, for example?
Not enough.
Mm,
Not enough. I mean, yes, it's a plus factor. And a lot of our older Sangat members benefit from the fact that people do call them once in a while and, ask them how they are. And they love that because there's some human connection. Otherwise, they're all alone at home, and, you know, I was really horrified to find out that there are places in I don't know if you've heard of Punjabi Community Health Services, which is in running from Toronto, and other places are in all over Canada. And what they do is they provide this help for those people who are alone, and some sort of communal help. But they also realize and find out that there are a lot of people, and I don't know if I should be mentioning this here, but there is a lot of abuse also going on with the elders. And I think this is something that we have to put our finger on.
Mm.
Loneliness can lead to being absolutely alone, where you are dependent on someone else and where they can manipulate you in any way that they want to. Again, education. And these community centers are now offering courses to the older Sikh members to come and say, this is your right. This is what you can do. And here's where you can go and get some help if you need some. But, we've got to get those people to be there to be able to get that help. But it's a very real problem. And it is something that needs to be addressed everywhere in the world. It's not only here in Canada, it's in the UK, US, and in India and everywhere else. And it's not only Indian community or Sikh community that I'm talking about. I'm talking about in general. Aging is one of the factors that may be in some way related to this climate action too, because the older generation are not as concerned about what's going to happen as the younger are,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
so education for themselves and to be in touch with the universe within yourself and outside is something that has to be taught starting from you know uh, elementary school. And that's where that mindfulness comes in, where you're able to understand what you are going through at whatever age level that you come to.
And it's about the process of adapting to our modern contemporary lives. It's about adapting in a way that we're not kind of, we are, because I think there is this myth that prosperity, it's about being in a bigger house or having a bigger car. That's the myth, isn't it? And
Yeah.
whereas prosperity can be, you're still in a small house, but you're happy, you have happy relationships. And so the focus needs to be different, compared with like how we're educated. It's like bigger is not always, wealth is not always in bigger homes, is it?
Yes. Wealth begins at in your own home, within yourself, when you're in harmony with all the existence. And that's where Guru Nanak Dev Ji's message comes time after time. Look within yourself. The whole universe is there. Sab gobind hai. Sab gobind hai. Gobind bin nahi koi. And that message, if it begins to reverberate in your whole being, then it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Even the you know, even the climate action, all the work that we are trying to do is reduced to an illusionary fact. I mean, that's something that we can't, you know, uh, you know, make it possible for everybody. But it's education once again to
Mhm.
understand what is going around. I think one of the purposes of Sikhi is to become one with nature.
Yes, that concept of oneness, and the oneness also with the creator, so
Yeah.
we, because we're educated to have like a direct connection with the creator, with Wahiguru, rather than it. God is not it.
Yeah.
God is, we're part of that oneness.
That's it. It's realizing that you are being looked after.
Mhm.
Not later, not anytime, now. And to be aware of that. Only with that awareness do you come to that point where that state of well being comes in. Because then you have nothing to worry about. So, as we said, Guru Nanak is the first embodiment of light for Sikhs. And, and he had this sacred vision for the environment, didn't he? He's a Pavan Guru, Pani Pita,
Mhm.
Mata Tart Mahat. All these lines, they keep telling us again and again, what does that mean to us as Sikhs? Do we actually live it? but we just hear it, we say it 1,000 times, but we do not intuitively realize that this is the truth that is being around us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to plug in my computer, otherwise we're going to.
Yeah.
Sorry about this. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, I was just going to talk now about partnerships, so again, like being part of this, that concept of oneness, it
Yeah.
encourages us to network and to, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
build bridges with others who are, also points of light.
Yes. Oh my goodness, it's so important. You always have these on point things.
Mhm.
So, like keeping close to, our hearts, this principle of oneness. I personally, for myself, one of the ways that I put it into action is by volunteering with international NGOs, like Khalsa Aid, you have Doctors Without Borders or United Sikhs, because I come from a Sikh community, so I tend to gravitate towards that. But there are many others that are helping out so many people at all kinds of level, and they provide humanitarian aid in disaster areas, and even in civil conflict zones around the world. So my personal way of being part of that, because I know that in the long run, this is helping shape the world in some small way. And because now I'm not able to travel to these areas myself, then I'm an artist, and I make art and I sell that, and I change it and try contribute towards these charities from its sales. And I've also done some visiting in schools in Punjab, and so we could train the educators to train the community in all these things that we've been talking about, to
Mhm.
bring these children to a point where they are asking the questions and saying, how can I change this?
Mhm.
Not, you tell me, but how can I make the difference?
Mhm.
So, so it's only from, when we are able to, develop enlightened and progressive societies, uh, I think that any kind of change can be made possible.
Mhm.
So, so we need to be having these socially conscious groups, of people who make a commitment.
Yes, and I suppose that in this fourth industrial revolution that we're part of at the moment,
Yeah.
education, rather than we decide what the subject is going to be for the children, the learner needs to decide for themselves. The learner
Yes.
needs to decide what, for their own context, what is it that they need to learn. That has to be the starting point. Who is the learner, and what do they want to learn? So asking that question, because there's information is available on everything. All you have to do is go onto Google or YouTube and you'll find information on everything. So it's not like in the olden days where, I remember, like, my eldest brother, when he went to university, it was a struggle for him to get the textbooks. They were really expensive, and
Mm.
you had to save up to buy that textbook that you needed to study that subject. But things are not like that anymore. So information is widely available, but we should stop wasting people's time by telling them what they need to learn, and instead ask them what they need to learn and enable them to research that for themselves.
Yes, absolutely. I think, and that's what will bring some sort of change. Otherwise, just pouring down information into people's minds, it just is not working, as we can see. And so there are so many groups that are working towards all these goals that we are thinking about. And I congratulate each one of them, that, they have brought in groups of students, maybe from schools or somewhere, who want to make a change. So yeah, one thing, other thing that I wanted to, since we were on the topic of oneness, I remember um, that if we look at any kind of natural disaster,
Mhm,
especially lately the COVID time that we all were,
mhm,
when the it's the time when the entire community, the world, bands together, because this is one time when we know that we have to be this in order to beat something. So it's only when the entire community, the world community, bands together and begins to help each other, regardless of race and religion and gender and socioeconomic class. They help each other. And and this is when we experience oneness.
mm.
We realize that, you know all the old patterns of thought, they stop, barriers drop, and we're no longer thinking of me, myself, and I. We all act just as a whole being. So during these times, oneness is the only not only felt but understood
Mhm.
within, intuitively. And they understand that, hey, we are one. Like, I mean, if you think about something happening like an earthquake or flooding, and people, when they start helping, they are not going out there and looking, hey, let me see now, are you educated, are you this, are you that? They just go and they help. And I think we've got to get to that um, understanding, and put that understanding into our younger generation of that oneness, where
Yeah,
they would realize that.
when I was doing my teacher training, I remember having to write an assignment on motivation and having to write about internal motivations and external motivations. And I remember reading somewhere, when I was doing that assignment, and this guy in this book, he was saying students are always motivated. It's just a question of finding out what they're motivated about. You see,
Mhm,
that's the
mhm.
thing. It's not like we have to motivate people. We have to find out what is it that motivates them. And some of these drivers, these are, the values that are driving us, the value of compassion. We rush to help somebody when they are in distress because we feel empathy, we feel compassion, and
Yes,
that's a strong force, isn't it? And
yes.
people who don't feel that empathy and that compassion, they won't do anything.
Mhm,
um, you see, look, now with Russia, for example, as soon
mhm.
as Putin said as soon as Putin said, "Oh, he's going to ask for all these volunteers to be conscripted," it's like there's long, long lines of people wanting to leave the country now. Whereas a couple of months ago, when their own kind of freedom and whatever wasn't, they weren't lining up to leave the country a few
Yeah,
months ago. But now they would rather, so that motivation is about fear rather than compassion. So
yes.
sometimes we're driven by fear for ourselves, but we need to have that kind of same, we need to kind of focus on being driven by compassion and empathy rather than fear.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think fear is the one thing that makes people not be who they are. They completely forget that the divine being that they are, because they begin to think of themselves only. And that's where, um, you know up you know the motivation of learning these values of compassion and hope and trust and faith, that we have to really embody ourselves first, and as educators, and then they can be then transmitted towards to the students. Otherwise it doesn't work at all.
Yes. And I suppose, again, going back to education, like a high quality education would develop our skills in empathy, develop our skills in intuition, so that we can see beyond, like what is visible and tangible and whatever. But there's not, I don't remember in any of my education being taught to develop my intuitive skills as such, and when we think about all of these goals, it's like, people see or they experience the flood, and then suddenly they start to take notice of climate action because their house was flooded. Whereas before their house was flooded, they didn't feel the empathy and the compassion with other people whose houses have been they've been subject to floods for decades. And so again, it's like, in order to address these goals, it does need then, unless it's like an emergency situation where we're driven by, well, we have no choice but to do something about this now, because otherwise we're going to suffer a drought and whatever. We need to kind of feel that empathy when other people on the other side of the world are experiencing the suffering. And so that empathy is about not our own suffering, it's about being able to feel, to respond to the suffering of others, isn't it?
Mm. Absolutely, yes, yes, yes. These it's looking beyond the physical differences, and looking at that we are all the same. And this is something what you mentioned is, it reminds me again of how our educators have to understand what mindful teaching is, where we are able to be mindful ourselves and then transmitting those values to those that we are teaching. And I feel that this has not yet been, adequately addressed in our education field. Teachers, they certainly know their stuff, and again, they are teaching, let's say, calculus or physics or any other subject. Um, but until and unless they can provide some sort of, uh, connection to how it's going to be affecting those that these people are learning from, it's not going to work, and it will be just a regurgitation once again. And so emphasis on mindful teaching and bringing mindfulness into classrooms where the students are constantly taught about being aware of their feelings, such as empathy and compassion and hope and unification, and bringing those feelings to the forefront than anything else. And how long does it take? If you think about these, even if you spend 2 minutes or 3 minutes before each, wherever you're doing it, it's going to be something that's going to be affecting them for their lives. So I really, really, advocate this way of bringing awareness into classrooms.
Yes, and also this long-term thinking, because I know, like for example, the Native Americans, the way they taught was like, what will be the impact of this on 7 generations from now? You see, and in
Mm,
Japan, when
mm,
they create business plans, it's like 100-year plans. So it's not just thinking about profitability in 5 years' time. It's like, well, let's think about where we're going with this, and what will be the impact in 100 years' time. So that, again, that's it's this short term kind of goals rather than the longer term vision. And again, it's to do
mm.
with intuition. It's again to do with empathy. It's like, how often are we taught to think about those future generations that we will never see, because we
Yes,
won't be alive in 100 years' time, but are we thinking about the impact of our actions on those that will live on this earth 100 years after we've gone?
absolutely. And how important is that? To be able to connect with what's not, we are not even going to be there. It's intangible right now for us. But that's okay, because I think we need to be connected to that. And I think that, I really truly believe, and that we are connected from the most, tangible perspective to the most absolute one. So we are in a relationship with each other. and affect each other in all sorts of ways. And I think this is something that has to be brought into somehow into each goal of education, because once it's there from that level, it's going to slowly come down to others things, all the things that we've been mentioning, so that we can actually live the golden dream where we can actually transform, alleviate, educate, and protect the lives of the underprivileged, let's say, the individual minority communities, and what you just said about those people that are not even here yet.
Yeah, because we spend a long time looking at our history and how, our present is impacted by the historical events, but how often do we look at the future? Maybe there should be a subject about
Yeah.
futurology. It's like, well, let's spend some time thinking about 500 years time from now, and how will our actions today have an impact on those who are living here on the planet in 500 years time,
Yes. So,
or
this
a
is
thousand years time.
yeah. And, it's when you look at your children or your grandchildren and you look at what they are inheriting from us, what gift are you leaving them?
Mhm.
Are they still going to have the same, fresh air that you're breathing right now? Or is it something that they're going to be going around in masks? Who knows? you know so I think this responsibility rests on each and every individual. It's not about any one particular person, but on each and every one of us.
Mhm. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Jaskorji. That's been, I've really found the conversation to be very stimulating and insightful.
Always.
Thank you
Thank you
for your
so much
thoughts.
for having me here. It's always delightful to be part of your conversation, and you bring excellent points to the conversation. Thank you for
Okay,
that.
wonderful. Thank you. Speak soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
Sat Sri Akal ji. Sat
Sat
Sri Akal.